I'm gonna give myself a 10-minute warning. Um, it's good to see you. It's good to see you all. It was interesting that Brian Stevenson's name came up because after my first year in law school, I interned for him at EJI back in 2010. And I remember riding from Alabama to Mississippi when he was preparing for this whole argument. And for those of you who don't know, Brian Stevenson's one of the most well-renowned civil rights attorneys in the nation. Michael B. Jordan played him in the movie, you know what I mean? and this past spring, I taught critical race theory at New York University School of Law. And I taught my seminar on the same floor of his office at the law school, right? And so it's funny you brought his name up because this morning on my flight from New York to Atlanta, who do I see but Brian Stevenson, right? I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So I walk up to him and I say, hey, Brian, how you doing? And he looked at me and I was like, this man has no idea. But he's, he played it off very well. So today I am going to talk about safety, harm, and cycles of violence. And specifically, I'm going to talk about how the city, the state, and the federal government help perpetuate cycles of violence, or perpetuate these cycles of violence in our communities, and what we can do to interrupt or disrupt these cycles of violence. And I'm going to talk about this through a few stories, right? I'm in the academic space and so much, we got the timer right there. I don't know if y'all knew that, but this is how the sausage is made. But yeah, so much of my life in the academy is scripted, and so I'm just going to talk about these stories and try to somehow wrap it up in a tight bow for you. Does that sound all right?
Yes.
Okay. So a couple of months ago, a man threatened to kill me in an elevator in New York at Knifeport. Now, this man had no idea who I was, but as I was entering this building a few blocks away from Central Park, this man, he was a little short, was arguing with this taller man outside of the building. And I went in, I got in the elevator, and the taller guy got in after me. And then out of nowhere, the shorter guy came in the elevator and said, you owe me an apology, right? Maybe they bumped into each other. I don't know what happened, I didn't see it. And he said, you owe me an apology. The tall guy was arguing with the shorter guy who had come into the elevator. And just looking at the shorter guy, it looked like he had some developmental disorder, right? His head was disproportionately small as compared to his body. And so I told the taller guy, it's like, just stop arguing with him. Then after that, the shorter guy turned to me and said, shut the F up. Shut the F up or I kill you. Then brought out the knife, extended it, and started to corner me at this elevator. There are no police officers around. Just me, these two guys. And then the desk attendant, maybe security guard, came to the elevator. He didn't have a gun or anything. And he said, excuse me, sir, you have to leave. And then the man turned towards him, the elevator's closed, and I went up to my appointment. And actually, 5 minutes later, I went back down to make sure that, no violent, ghastly, horrible event happened. And everybody was safe. The guy was actually checking on me. The front desk attendant was checking on me. And the most ironic part of it all was this happening at my So before my therapist appointment, I was on my way to therapy, right? But it's telling, it made me think about so many things, right? It made me think about how we didn't need a police officer. Everybody walked away from that account, right? And so in order to leave that situation without me getting assaulted, without anybody getting assaulted, we didn't need a police officer, right? 2, we didn't need a gun on the scene, right? We responded to harm, right? This front desk attendant responded to harm without a gun, right? Without using a gun. It also made me think about how I'm glad that a police officer was not there, right? Because there are various things that count as violence exposure, right? Just witnessing an assault is violent exposure, or battery is violence exposure. Being threatened is a form of violence exposure. And so, when that man put out that night, that was an assault that put me in imminent apprehension of harm. That was a violent act. I was exposed to violence. But just imagine if a police officer were there who would have been well within his or her or their rights to kill this man, right? One, this man who obviously had a developmental disorder would be killed probably as a result of just not being able to regulate his emotions in a healthy manner, not because he's just inherently a bad person, but maybe the architecture of his brain is such that it just doesn't, it's not conducive for him regulating as well as some of us. But also, the detrimental psychological effects on myself would have been greater because I would have witnessed somebody being killed in front of me. If a police officer were on the scene and would have acted as the law gives them the authority to do, right? Which is to use deadly violence when somebody else is threatened by deadly violence. Thank God a police officer is not there. But it also made me think about how fortunate I was to have a therapist right upstairs, right? Literally just waiting on me to talk about what I need to talk about. And how few people who are exposed to violence has that readily available, right? And what safety means, right? Because we know that's what safety entails, is not only having somebody interrupt the violence, but also having somebody or somebody's, or some people, a group, a community, whatever, to address the harms that stem out of that violence. And so many of us don't have that. But our money is going somewhere, right? Our money is going towards the perpetuation of these cycles of violence and not towards interrupting this violence. Which brings me to another story that many of you might be familiar with, which is Bradley Blackshire, the story of Bradley Blackshire, the 30-year-old father of 5 who was killed by a Little Rock police officer here in Little Rock in 2019. I don't reduce Bradley's life to the worst thing that was done to him, right? He was a charismatic guy, a charming, doting father. He was so much more than, what brought him to the public's attention. But he also was a survivor of violence. He was a survivor of violence, as so many people in our city are, but aren't treated as such, right? We've come a long way as a society at recognizing survivors of certain types of violence. violence, right? So like survivors of the violence of war, Vietnam veterans, right? Trying to be compassionate when we address sometimes the neurotic or psychotic behavior of veterans, or some we have a long way to go, like survivors of domestic violence, like really trying to stop criminalizing survivors of domestic violence. But when we talk about survivors of police violence, when we talk about survivors of street violence, our sympathy kind of takes a break. That's what Bradley was. In his youth, he was shot. He was a victim of gun violence. And in his youth, he was arrested for a drug crime and arrested thereafter for parole violations and the like. And often this term arrest is kind of sanitized. We decontextualize it. But we should call it what it is. It's an act of violence. It's somebody trying to capture your body, to hold you captive, for the state to determine whether it's going to inflict harm on your body in the form of criminal punishment or not, right? And hold you captive in these institutions when you're subjected to slavery, right? Or involuntary servitude, right? That's all of this. The arrest, this violent act of capture, is the gateway to that. And every single person who is arrested is a survivor of state violence. It's an inconvenient truth, but this is what it is. Really just think about it. Bradley was a survivor before he was killed by this Little Rock police officer. And that day, he borrowed a car from a friend that was overdue from a rental car agency. There's no evidence that Bradley knew that the car was overdue from a rental agency. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. There's no evidence that he even knew. But with our tax dollars, the city is surveilling us all. He was driving down the street, the city scanned the license plate, it came up as stolen. They didn't know if it was a carjacking or just simply overdue from a rental agency, so they just probably assumed the worst. And they just dispatched police officers to respond to the car. Bradley parked in the barbershop, unaware that he was being targeted. And the officer barricaded him, got out the car, and approached Bradley with the gun drawn. This rental car was overdue. The moment the officer approaches him with this gun drawn, that's violence exposure, right? That's a serious, threatening, life-threatening, deadly event. When the officer did that and held the gun at Bradley's head within 3 feet away from him. That's never happened to me. I don't know what I would do if somebody did that, let alone if I had already been a victim of gun violence, let alone if I had already been a victim of police violence, right? If I had already had those traumatic experiences. And if in order to cope with all of these traumatic experiences, which are compounded by just being in a city that misallocates wealth, right? That spends millions of dollars helping people flee to Maumelle and flee to Bryan instead of actually trying to help address the trauma that is leading to a lot of this violence, right? People have to find their own ways to cope. So yeah, he had some drugs in his system. And under all these conditions, the state commands him to stay cool. Stay cool. It's dehumanizing. And he asked the officer, he said, "Why are you going to shoot me?" And the officer didn't say, "I'm going to shoot you. I don't want to shoot you. Just get out of the car. It'll be okay." The officer just kept saying, "Get out of the car." Right? And then Bradley attempts to flee. He drives the car. Instead of moving it out of the way, the car, the officer leads into the car, shoots 14 times to kill his brother. Right? The state perpetuated these cycles of harm. And then after the fact, the city spends probably $500 million trying to defend itself from civil liability, eventually settles the civil suit for hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Whereas before Bradley was killed, there was no money to address all of these traumatic experiences that Bradley had been exposed to. There was no money to help remedy Bradley's transportation issue, or his housing issue, or his substance abuse issue. But then all of a sudden, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars available of your money now. These cycles don't just exist in individuals' lives, right? They spin out. They affect whole families. And so, Bradley has siblings. Bradley has a mother. Bradley has children, nephews, nieces, friends, all of whom are impacted by this act of violence. But this act is decontextualized in a way that you just they don't even come in the purview. His mother, his father, but not the whole community that's impacted. And he sends one of his sisters into this tailspin, and somehow a year later she ends up being shot to death by street violence. Shot to death. And her son, Bradley's nephew, who adored Bradley, who the city, neither the city nor the state sort of tended to try to see, like, how did your uncle's death, how did his killing impact you, right? He's right there watching his son being killed. His mother dies in his arms at 15 years old. But nobody from the city, nobody from the state is there to address the trauma of this child whose mother died in his arms, right? The state is cutting taxes so rich people can have more money in their coffers. The city is, or the state or whoever is spending all this money on highways so we can deplete our tax base and make it easier for people to flee. But this little 15-year-old boy has to help him transition to a world without his uncle. His dad's already locked up, and without his mother. But a year later, when he's suspected of committing murder and gets arrested on murder charges, all of a sudden, the state has infinite resources to provide him housing for as long as he wants, to feed him, or not even as long as he wants, as long as they want, right? To feed him as long as they want, to hire prosecutors to prosecute him, to ask judges to send him away for the rest of their life, his life, right? It's been, but they like, look, we're going to sign a blank check to hold you captive. Now, but before, when your mother was dying in your arms, we're not going to reach out. That's not what we do. So it's like, what are they doing with your money? Are they trying to ensure safety or ensure control? Right? And we're in Arkansas. Like, this is a very unique set of circumstances that we're in here. And a lot of times we cannot wait for state lawmakers or the city to act before we act. And so, my timid one. And so, there are things we can do now to help disrupt these cycles, right? Imagine if, while Bradley's parents were incarcerated, right? I mean, first, we've already had people today. Imagine if we didn't even have to deal with incarceration. But so now I'm going to take a step back and say, imagine if when that was happening, his parents were incarcerated, Bradley. We had a community that ensured that whenever Bradley wanted to see his mother, they could secure transportation for him to visit his mother, right? Imagine if when Bradley was shot, we had a network, a web of support to ensure that Bradley had therapy, that Bradley's mom didn't have to worry about how she was going to put food on the table at this time, that back to school, Bradley had a community willing to provide these clothes. Or if you just had a space where they can just talk, right? Where people impacted by incarceration, people impacted by street violence, people impacted by police violence, you just come together in these circles or whatnot, just talk, right? Without somebody trying to dictate the conversation. Imagine if after every instance of a shooting, after every shooting, police shooting, street shooting, there's a web of support saying, I got your free haircut, I got your food, I got your clothes, look, just come here, I do massages, you can come over here, right? And that's, and also imagine if while Bradley was being prosecuted as a youth for that drug crime, we had that participatory defense community there to ensure that Bradley didn't feel alone, that his family did not feel alone as the state was prosecuting him, right? And that's what is happening now. It's already happening. We already support each other. We already interrupt violence. It's just how do we bring it to scale? And that's one of the things that we're trying to do at the Little Rock Freedom Fund, that we are doing at the Little Rock Freedom Fund. With Don Jeffrey, that was a participatory defense campaign that we had. After the tornadoes, we engaged in mutual aid. And there's the mental health conference coming up on October 21st that the Little Rock Freedom Fund is doing. But in order to build this web of support, we need your help. We need your help. And so we need your help in building it out. We need your help in finding people who are willing to make themselves available to the next victim of street violence, or the next victim of police violence, and say, I can't undo the harm done to you, but I can create a space where you feel seen, where you feel supported, where you feel loved, where you feel safe. Right? You can get your hair did, you can get your nails did, you can get some food, you can get a free checkup, whatever. That's what we're trying to build out. So I hope that you'll find me or Osara's body over there, still in the ground. Or we see Don Jeffrey in the community and say, look, I'm interested in helping to build this web of support that we're doing as a complement to all the other great groups doing the work here. As we continue to continue to be successful, right? We're claiming the victory and interrupting these cycles of violence, these cycles of harm, without necessarily depending on the city or the state to change their policies or practices before we move into action. We can keep ourselves safe. We can respond to harm ourselves while also holding them accountable. So as we continue to disrupt these cycles of harm, we continue to envision and realize the just society. I'm excited to work with all of you. And I'm sorry I didn't respond to the letter, but we're gonna get there. We're gonna do a restorative justice thing to restore this relationship. So with that, thank you so much.